Right. Well, good morning. Today, my guest is Maria Brito. Good morning, Maria. And in this series, I've deliberately chosen guests that will kind of mirror the chapters of my own book, Eat the Pudding First. And Maria perfectly links into the chapter that I wrote about creativity. And I was talking about how people in business need to be more creative and people in the arts need to have more business acumen about them. And in fact, Maria is so perfectly tuned into this that she's actually written her own book, which I've got here, How Creativity Rules the World. Let's get your book plug in right at the beginning here, Maria. Come on, we know that's why you're here. But actually, it's a really good read, much better than my own book, you know, much more sophisticated. And actually, it's kind of three books in one, I found, because not only is it a business help book, but it's also a bit of a biography. It's a bit of an autobiography. It talks a lot about your life too, and your history from Venezuela, and stories about your grandfather being kidnapped, which was pretty scary. But it's also it's an interesting comment on some of the more controversial artists that have kind of changed the face of the arts as well. I'm thinking about, you know, Caravaggio in the old days, you know, murdering people in Rome, being sent away and being brought back and sent away and murdering somebody else, you know, through to Jackson Pollock, you know, through to Andy Warhol, who you talk about being the kind of serial repeater. So welcome, Maria. I'm very excited to talk to you and understand a bit about your life, which really is a blend of creativity in the arts. So just start me off by telling us how you made the switch, because it's a brave switch. You weren't like a, you know, kind of South American boxer where you had nothing else to do. You know, you had a great career before you made the switch. How did that come about?
Well, thank you, Gary, for the invitation of being here today with you. And thank you for reading the book. That makes me very happy that you found it interesting. I think at the end of the day, every author aspires to keep readers engaged and to give them value and entertainment and some new perspective on an old issue, which is what I attempted to do with How Creativity Rules the World. But your question is obviously the perfect, you know, gateway for me to like introduce myself, because yes, I went to Harvard Law and I moved to New York City I started, as you very well said, in Venezuela. And, you know, my life has been one of kind of trying to be better for myself and not being prey of the circumstances. So the fact that I was born there doesn't mean that that country owns me or anything, right? And so my parents still are very conservative, and South American Catholic is a very narrow way of seeing the world. They are great people, but that doesn't mean I agree with everything that they think. And I was primed as a child to follow a path of certainty. For them, the options were you need to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, something that is going to be dependable and that you're going to have for the rest of your life, and so that you will be able to sustain yourself. And, you know, I guess they wanted me to be fulfilled and happy with that choice, right? But it didn't really leave me many choices. So they
were more focused on the security aspect of your career.
Yeah, I mean, and so it's also, you know, I think parents prepare their kids for the world they know and not for the real world, honestly, right? And so their world was kind of small. And I ended up really going to law school and believing in that safety that the job was going to provide. And the truth is, it does provide a lot of safety, and it is a very solid career. And I moved to New York and I practiced in corporate law firms for 9 years. I worked, you know, also in company. I did a lot of things trying to really find myself in a place of happiness and fulfillment. And that never really happened because I was not meant to be an attorney. So after I had my first child, I had already been for a long time sort of questioning what was I doing in a law firm and how miserable I was with everything. And when I got pregnant, I started thinking more if I wanted to have that kind of legacy for my family, showing them that I hated my job, because it was showing already, right? And so those are things that you can't hide. And I had thought about a lot of different things that I could do, including owning my own business, which ultimately is what I did. And I had a passion for contemporary art and an enormous curiosity and an enormous interest. Living in New York City makes things very easy because it is full of galleries and museums and curators, and it has a really strong, and he had and continues to have a really strong interest in the arts. And I was paying attention to people who were art advisors and people who work in the arts, and I thought they were all so boring and not necessarily people who wanted to take opportunities in technology and social media. And I thought that was my chance, even though I was an attorney, not necessarily doing all these things. But I said, well, look, if I can combine 2 or 3 or 4 things and be relatively good at them, I think I'm going to beat the crowd. And that's what
Let me take you back to that point then, Maria, because there must have been a kind of jump off point. As I said, a lot of people that set up their own businesses, if they do it when they're young enough and they don't have a mortgage, they don't have a family, they don't have children in private school, it's easy. You know, if it all goes wrong, you can just pick yourself up, dust yourself down and get a job somewhere else. Doesn't matter. But actually, that wasn't you. You know, you've been at Harvard, you've got a degree, you practiced law, you had a family. Did you have a kind of security buffer there that you felt would give you a period of time to change? And how difficult was it for you to just take the jump and jump into the cold water and have this complete career change? Did people around you think you were mad?
Yes. I did have savings because I worked in law firms for 9 years. So that was an excellent salary plus bonuses and things like that. It doesn't really give you that much time to spend it anyway, because they, you know, you work, I don't know, 24/7. And
yeah. So you had a bit of a buffer. Had you played the New York property market a little bit too? So you had an adequate buffer to keep you going for a while?
Yeah, I did. And, you know, my husband worked too full time. So I could sort of like not necessarily put it on him or rely on him for everything. But I said, well, look, I mean, let me try this and see what happens. But I had this idea that there was no plan B. And that's usually how I think the most, you know, daring entrepreneurs go head on in business is we have to make this work. And but not in a place of rigidity or, you know, is this or nothing, but like, this has to work and I'm going to have to. And I knew that I was going to have to tweak it along the way, because that's pretty much the history of any business, is that you do have to pivot, shift, adjust, take things off, put things back, trial and error for many things, right? But I had a very honest and strong desire to demystify the art world for the layman and to approach and embrace the market in a way that was a whole lot more down to earth than a lot of those people who were populating it with, like, you know, delusions and things like that. And so I think that it was frightening, obviously, but I never doubted that I was going to be able to succeed. And because it was like one step at a time. And so, and when you do things and you get the proper feedback from the market, the clients, the press, you know, things like that, me being a totally unknown person, sort of like climbing a very difficult market in a very difficult industry. So the feedback was very positive. Not from, I mean, from the get-go, you're not going to get like the best client. You're not going to make $1 million in like the first month, right? But as I allow myself the first 6 months to see what was going to happen, I started seeing a lot of positives.
I think that's a great example of you practicing what you preach, because you didn't just dabble. You know, you went into it wholeheartedly and you kind of burnt the bridge back. There was no way back. You know, you went to live on the other side of the river for a while with the creative people, And I like the way that you burnt that bridge. And I think there's a lesson to people that are reading your book and mine, in that you've got to commit. You can't do it half-heartedly. You have to jump off the cliff and make a real commitment and throw everything at it. Certainly with me, when I started my own business, there wasn't very much work-life balance, which is what everybody talks about. Everyone wants work-life balance. That didn't come for me for many years. It was, you know, a bit like when you were working in law, you know, you're working 90, 100 hours a week. Work-life balance doesn't tend to come when you throw everything out the pram and decide to start up your own business.
Yeah, I mean, and the commitment to do something wholeheartedly is step one, right? And the step two is testing and experimenting what works and what doesn't, and having patience, and particularly people who are right now, you know, involved in this whole kind of social media world where things seem one thing from the outside, but really there is so much sweat and work behind that curated perfect lifestyle that people tend to believe that, you know, success is an overnight thing, and it really is not. It does take patience, faith, work, countless hours, as you know, but when you're doing stuff that is yours, right? I mean, it's your business, and you also receive this kind of positive feedback, and you are aware of the trends, and you are aware of the here and now, because that's the other thing, right? Like, you have to serve a client, a group of people, an audience in the here and now. And so it's very important to be attuned to what's happening in your surroundings, and that requires your own personal research. It's not just reading things on a computer or in a book. It's like going out, shaking hands, taking the polls, seeing what's happening, paying attention to people, paying attention to dialogues, and looking at the fringes for whatever it is that other people are missing. So I think those are things that are relatively easy to do, but most people don't.
Well, let me pick up on that, because there's a really hard question behind this. There's no point in me asking you easy questions, Maria. Everyone asks you easy questions. Let's ask you some hard questions. And I struggle with this question too, because we both write about trying lots of stuff. We both write about trying lots of stuff and keep what works. Jim Collins talks admirably about try lots of stuff and keep what works in his Good to Great book. And we both talk about tenacity, and we both talk about grit. But somebody asked me the other day, how do you know when it's working? And how do you know when you're riding a dead horse? How do you know when to get off? How do you know when to stop doing this? It's not going to work, and then try something over here. And I found that difficult to answer. It was almost a kind of instinct for me. Yes, you've got to be tenacious, try lots of stuff thoroughly, but if it's not working, try something else. How do you answer that question? How do you know when to stop and actually accept that maybe you need to try something else?
Well, you know, business decisions for me have been informed by both intuition and results, and the overall health of a particular business line or decision. And I think that since I already know how miserable I could have been as an attorney, and if something, you know, because it's a very different thing when something is hard and you have to keep trying because you already have gotten some results, and you keep going because you know that there is something there. It's a very different feeling that when you cringe at the idea that you have to keep doing something, and it really brings you down if you know the difference between those two things. For example, when I've done many different things out of both curiosity and the excitement of exploring different aspects within my own business. And so there was a time about 8 years ago where I partnered with a lot of very incredible artists to create lines of high-end accessories. And it started as a fun type of thing, that it was just a limited edition of 10 each, and all the artists were amazing, and we had a great outlet. And so that for me at the beginning was fun, but when it was so successful that we decided to do more, and then it became very complicated, and I started resenting it because we were running after retailers to pay us. We were running after factories to deliver on time. We were working with like PR agencies to hit milestones of, a calendar in fashion that we didn't really give a damn, you know what I mean? And so when 3 years into this, yes, it was a profitable part of the business, but the headaches were so gigantic that it wasn't worth it anymore, right? And so when someone, and it's not to deter people to do manufacturing or fashion or whatever it is, because if your heart is set on a particular path, you'll follow it regardless, right? But for me, it was the discomfort, not the discomfort of growth, but the discomfort of having my staff, my time, all of us running after things that, I could sell a painting tomorrow for $1 million, make 10% of that is $100,000. And I was running after a factory guy because he didn't deliver 5 boxes on time. I was like, this is just bullshit. Sorry, but it doesn't make any sense. So I think that, I think when people have great ideas and they have had some successes and it's not sustained over time, usually it needs some tweaks. You are not going to kill the whole thing. You just need to be able to tweak what's not working. And usually that requires just small turns in your position, right? I mean, you have to be able to see things from a variety of different angles to check what could be done better, right, for you.
You do. Again, it's interesting. I think people are obsessed with ideas and creativity, and they're sitting waiting for the next Google idea or the next Amazon idea. When actually, I think, in my experience, there are good ideas on every street corner. There are things that you can change and you can adapt. And actually, it's all about the execution. A lot of it's about the execution, and you talk about that in your book too. Execution is about being better than competitors. It's not about being great. It's about you have to be better than your competitors and sell more than they do, or be better at marketing than they do. I spent a while in a great job. I was chair of the enterprise committee for the University of the Arts, which is a great university in London with some of the best creative aspects. And people were obsessed with these inventions that they'd made, clothing that was impregnated with smell, that would allow you to change your mood. And they were obsessed with people stealing their IP.
Yes.
Whereas actually it was the execution that they lacked. And I really think it's important to think about the way you bring your ideas to life, not just wait for some dynamic idea to come. And you talked about the fashion thing. How important do you think it is to come up with creative ideas in aspects of your life that you enjoy? Somebody once said, if you love what you're doing, you'll never work a day in your life. Given how difficult it is to build businesses up, how important is that focus, do you think?
Well, I think that you touch on a very important aspect. First is the execution. And, yes, there are great ideas everywhere. And I think that the issue is, how do you bring them to life and whether or not they are viable, right? And so that's when I bring in, again, the part of trust your intuition, but also be very aware of what's happening around you. Because if you have a visionary idea that the world is not ready for, and you do not have a team like Apple or like Tesla, then you're going to really encounter way too many issues to bring it to reality, right? And I think that the important thing is to be able to test. The important thing is to be able to be nimble. And I think that everybody who is at an early stage of a business or an early stage of a new idea in a business has to be very flexible and nimble about it, because again, it's all about refining and making sure that things aligned with what exists, and how to be, you know, better than your competitors, or different for that matter, right? And so the passions that people have, to go back to the question, are very important in the execution of those ideas, because if you're passionate about a topic, or you're passionate about an industry or a particular thing, then you're going to find a lot of ease in researching or gathering data of the things that are crucial for that idea to pick up, right? I mean, if I decide tomorrow to get myself into a whole world of cryptocurrencies, and I just don't think it's going to play out really well, because I'm not passionate about cryptocurrencies. I love the idea of the NFTs for artists, and I understand them very well, but it's also something that, as much as I love and understand, is not necessarily where I'm putting my eggs or my time, or like trying to convince my clients of something that my clients have a whole different generation of Gen Z. So they are not really. So I think that it's the viability of things also, it's important when you consider your passions, right? I mean, it might be that you're super passionate about something, but it's not viable right now. So what else is? Most people have not one, but 2, 3, 4 things that they love, right? I mean, at the very least, most normal people. So when you combine those ideas, what new thing comes out of there, right? I mean, what unique thing comes out of there? And that is typically what I tell people, where they find the sweet spot is like, you don't have to be the #1 best at this thing. You have to be great at these 4 things and see how you put them together. But
and they'll come together. Absolutely. Yeah. I also think there's an interesting way about how people frame things when they don't work out. So it's really about the failure word. And, you know, as we grow older, we get, I think, more frightened of failure. When we're at school, we don't call it failure. If we try and play the violin and that doesn't work out, and then we'll try and play the piano, and maybe it's a different musical instrument, or we'll play a game of hockey and we don't like that, and somehow netball or basketball will take over. We call it experimentation. We don't call it failure. We don't say I failed at playing the guitar, so I started to learn the saxophone. And I think it's really important how people frame that world failure, because it's just another way of finding out that something didn't work. I mean, most people that I know that have ever smoked, you know, they didn't give up smoking on their first attempt. They had quite a few attempts before they finally gave up, 5 or 6 or 7 attempts, and then, you know, now hopefully they're clean. And you talk quite a bit about embracing failure in your book. What advice would you give people who are thinking of setting up their own business? In terms of being certain about what they do before they do it?
Well, the issue of failure, you know, I have a whole chapter in my book about it, because it is a necessary part of growth and a necessary part of learning. And I think that when you detach yourself from something that didn't go the way you planned it, and you call the failure that thing and not you, you will get rid of a lot of baggage in that sense, right? Because a lot of people tend, and you know, I know many entrepreneurs who have been through many iterations of businesses, and sometimes they call themselves a failure because XYZ thing didn't work out. And as I said in the book, put the failure on the project, put the failure on the business line that didn't work, not you. So that didn't work, but that doesn't mean you're incapable of success, or you're not equipped to run a business profitably or whatever. So people who are looking to start a business, I think that the biggest thing is to remain flexible, and to look always for ways of growing their creativity. That doesn't mean, it's a lot of people, as you know, have this huge bar about what it is to be creative or what it means for them to be creative. And the truth is that creativity is nothing more than an amalgamation of habits and skills daily, applying them daily. And one of the most important things is to be consistent at what you do and to keep working on your projects, dreams, etc. And so the momentum that gives is where you do find your ideas for the most part. And obviously people need time off, downtime, silence. People need to be also willing to take risks. Like you said, as we get older, we become more risk averse, and it's natural because people have already seen so much and they have already quote unquote failed, and they think that if they take this step, this might go wrong. And so, but you know, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So if you don't take those risks, first, somebody else is going to take them and going to leave you behind. And second, you're never going to be able to get to the next level without taking chances, because, you know, comfort zones are fantastic for plateaus. So you will stay on the same place or probably like take a dip if you want to keep growing. And growth can be measured through revenues. It can be measured by numbers of, you know, lines of business. It can be measured by the amount of people you work with, etc. It's just many different ways to measure success and growth, but it's unusually happens when things always stay the same.
Let me take you back to creativity, which is the core of your book, really, How Creativity Rules the World, because what excited me about it was you were almost giving permission to people to be creative. You were saying anybody can be creative. And I think if people read your book and that inspires them, then you'll have done a great job. But let's go, you know, so many people put themselves in boxes. They'll say, I'm not creative. They'll say, I can't draw, or I can't sing, or I'm not an academic. You know, they'll put themselves in these kind of self-imposed boxes. But why don't you dispel some of the myths that people use to tell themselves that they're not creative? Why don't you break some of those down for the people that might be watching you and I today?
Well, the myths are very common. And one is obviously this confusion between the term creativity and artistry, which are related, but they are not the same. So just to go back to the idea of creativity, what creativity is each person's, your unique ability to come up with ideas of value that can be materialized, right? Because they are not going to stay in the abstract, is those things that can be executed. And the artist obviously depends on their ideas because they're consistently putting them out there in the world in the form of a film or a canvas or a sculpture, but they are not the only one creative. Because if you think about people like Steve Jobs, it's like a really, really highly creative individual who was consistently coming up with ideas and surrounding himself with a team of people who could actually execute them, because he was not a coder. He was not a designer. He had dropped off from college and he had decided to take a job at Atari and to work with programmers and things like that, right? So the term creativity and artistry, although they sometimes overlap, it's not just for artists or people who can draw, people who can sing, or people who can cook, right? It's for everybody who is alive and well and breathing in this time and wants to come up with better ideas for success and for the service of whomever it is that they serve with their business. So a lot of people call themselves right-brained and left-brained. That's another myth. Mm-hmm. The brain, the human brain, needs both hemispheres to work in parallel, right? I mean, the fact that we have talents that veer more towards, let's say, a numerical memory or a numerical ability, rather than someone who is excellent at writing prose or poetry, right? That doesn't mean that one side and the other one are not consistently talking. And for example, again, you need, if somebody's coding, which is a job that requires a numerical ability, that person has to be creative too, because, you know, code is all about speed. It's all about, you know, how to make things better. It's about how, it's a different language that you want to put out in the world to make technology do what you want it to do, right? And to do that, if you are a guy like Mark Zuckerberg, who coded Facebook for the first time, you know, 16 years ago, whatever it was, this is a math guy who's highly creative, if you follow what I'm saying, right? So the whole mystery or myth is already debunked by scientists. You know, it's been written, but nobody really talks about that for some reason. You know, I still keep, when I hear left brain, right brain, I cringe. But you know, one other myth is like it's genetic. Like there's really nothing. I really went deep into probably about 20 or so studies that go literally into the genetics of it. They, you know, one of the studies went after a set of twins in Germany, and like, you know, one did one thing and the other one did another, and they checked the parents, and there was really not a gene. And here's why: because again, creativity is an amalgamation of skills, right? If like creativity were to be something that was inheritable, then it'll be, you know, Madonna and all the 10 siblings she had, all of them would be Madonna 2, 3, 4, 5. You know what I mean? And so, or like, you know, Picasso and his sisters, you know, like he's one of the sisters died, but the other one would be also, you know, an incredible painter, and she's not, and she was not. So,
I agree. I agree. Creativity can be learned. It can be rehearsed. It can be practiced. You also talk. I thought this chapter was interesting. You talk about people having a bag of tricks. You see, I have read your book, really. People having a bag of tricks to kind of help them nurture their creativity. And I've certainly studied creative people myself. And they've seen all sorts of ways that they can do that. You talk about muses as well. I did a big study about Walt Disney, who I found a fascinating gentleman, and people who met him. I've spoken to people that met Walt Disney, and they said there were almost 3 Walts, and you never knew which one was coming to the meeting. There was Walt the dreamer, there was Walt the realist, and there was Walt the critic. And he intentionally put himself into these 3 boxes. He even had different rooms. He had a creative room where the chairs were laid back and everybody was kind of breezing away. And then he had a different, and he invented storyboarding actually on those creative rooms. And then it was, you know, how do we realistically get this Pirates of the Caribbean ride or whatever it is to come? And then he was very critical of his own work too, but he made sure that he wouldn't let the critic invade his creative space. He made sure that he had 3 different spaces for those, and that a lot of people hear the voices, oh, that would never work. Well, he wouldn't let that happen. And those that bag of tricks that you talk about, I think, is people finding their own way to nurture their own creativity. How do you nurture yours? What do you find works for you?
well, you know, not every day is the same, so I can't really go into all the ideas and concepts of my book for myself every day. That's why I call it a bag of tricks, because you put your hand in that bag of trick and see what you can get any given day. But I spend every day a good amount of time in silence. And that is actually something that I try to do daily. I meditate, and I think it's an incredible an extraordinarily cheap way to calm your brain and wait for those ideas to hit. I think it is fascinating what you can do when you allow yourself those moments of silence. I am extremely curious, so I usually go into big rabbit holes through the internet when I'm looking for something, and then I look for something else, and then I look for something else, and it might not necessarily be anything that it pertains to my business, but I end up getting to something that is relevant for today. And so that gives me another idea to go and check something. And sometimes I have way much more ideas than the ones that I can actually pursue for real and in all seriousness in my business. And so I just have to let the decision making of what's more important in for my business, for my career, is this going to make money? Is this going to build an audience? Is this, so it's that constant evaluation of what are the things that are worth pursuing and what are the times where you just go on these rabbit holes too that maybe you're thinking, but it's not efficient. But at the end of the day, it is, because I end up stumbling upon something. So I let my curiosity dictate a lot of this paths that I go into, and I don't censor, you know, why I am Googling a certain thing that, you know, it may not have, again, anything to do with my business, but, you know, there is this incredible and very also easy thing to do in anybody who's in business, which is also the mantra of Warren Buffett, is if you're not spending 5 hours a week learning something else, you're doomed. Because again, you know, you just want to make sure that you are able to combine these different things that you have learned. And mastery is a big word also these days, because I don't necessarily think that anybody's mastering anything anymore, because the field of knowledge is vast in absolutely every industry, and every little part and every micro part of an industry is just layers and layers. And, you know, knowledge multiplies daily with like the amount of incredibly brilliant people doing things and the access that we have to that knowledge. But if you are interested in getting 5 things that are, you know, passions of yours, or 4 things, and you spend 5 hours a week, which is, if, you know, is 1 hour a day, and like on weekdays, you can accumulate an enormous amount of new and valuable wisdom that can be turned into creativity.
But I think you have to, because of the pace of change is so abrupt now. I was talking yesterday to somebody about how youth culture demands instant gratification. How, you know, you see something you see something that Kim Kardashian's got, I want it now, I deserve it now, Amazon will deliver it tomorrow, some shonky online credit card company will lend me the money to buy it, and suddenly there it is in my hand. So everything happens so quickly. I talk in my book, and you talk in yours too, about getting into second position. I'm British, so I sort of talk about it very gently about, you know, getting into second position. It's important to look at life through the other person's eyes. I love the expression that you use, which is seeing into the hearts of others. I love that. I love that phrase. And I think it's important for all of us, for all successful people, to try and, you know, we spend far too long in our lives stuck in first position, looking at lives through our own eyes. Whereas if we want to become creative, it's so important to get into second position and look at life through our customers' eyes, through our children's eyes, through our mentors' eyes, to enable us to have a much, you know, even fly over the top of us on a helicopter, you know, third position, looking down on us, seeing how life works, for us to come up with those new ideas. The other thing that I think is interesting about your book and about the speed of change is that you don't have to put in the time when you're being creative. Malcolm Gladwell, in his book Outliers, which I love that book, and I like Malcolm Gladwell, he talks about you need to have the raw talent, and then you need to put in the 1,000 hours. And, you know, try to work out how much piano practice, 1,000 hours, a long time, it's years of piano practice, you know. And if you want to be a great, you know, baseball player, or even the Beatles spent all that time in Hamburg just knocking out songs. Whereas if you get the right creative idea, you don't have to go through any of that. You can make change immediate and very, very quickly. But you have to surround yourself with the right people. what advice would you give people about the kind of teams that they should surround themselves with to give them the best chance of success?
Well, organizational psychology of this late few years tells us that the best teams are those that are most diverse, and the ones that incorporate people of different genders, whatever spectrum you're willing to go, different ages, different races and backgrounds. And so that is why also at the end of my book, I mentioned that it's already happening, and you will see that more in the future. Artists will be invited to become parts of board of directors in companies, and they will also have different types of more involved roles in shaping policies. And the same thing goes for someone like me or someone like you, because it is necessary to involve people who see life from a variety of different angles and with a variety of different careers and experiences, and not just one thing, because the era of the hyper specialist is dead, except if you are a doctor, which of course, please, by all means, you need to be a hyper specialist, or if you're a scientist and you're just looking for the cure to cancer, please be a hyper, even though, and this is a caveat, a lot of Nobel Prize scientists and doctors, when you ask them where they get the best ideas, they say, I play tennis, and then, I read cookbooks, and I go to ballet functions and events, and that's when I find my best ideas for those micro animals or whatever it is that I'm looking through the microscope, right? I mean,
sometimes they're found by accident. Edison discovered the light bulb, the way the light bulb works, putting in a vacuum.
But the thing is, you see, nothing that is 100% pure and self-contained is necessarily a place where you're going to find progress and groundbreaking ideas, and that's why I said teams that you want to have around you are people who are really diverse. And if you are the smartest person in the room, you're fucked. Sorry about my French, but because that means that it's very little space for you to grow, right? I mean, and I understand the challenge, because sometimes you may not be able to hire people who are smarter because they are probably going to be more expensive, but join masterminds, join, groups of people who actually meet with passion online or in person once a month and discuss topics, and you can learn. And it's I hate the word networking, but you know what I'm trying to say.
It's actually diversity of thought that we crave. Yes. And I'm seeing that in business too, having worked in kind of corporate Britain, where really for the last 15 years, there's been a box ticking episode, especially in financial markets, where, people have had their bonuses based on, getting equality of gender, or, getting the right amount of mixed heritage people onto boards. And it's really been, they've just been doing it because they've been told to do it. And I think the revolution now is that people are realizing that having that diversity of thought on their board is actually making them better businesses, is actually making them more profitable, is actually making them understand their customers better, and helping them outpace their competitors. So I do think we're starting to go through a revolution now where people are almost trying to outpace themselves with the diversity that they're surrounding themselves with. And that's got to be a great thing.
It is.
It is. So I've loved talking to you. I have to ask you, though, before we go, you haven't mentioned them in your book, but let me ask you, who are the people that have most influenced you on your journey, Maria? Who are the people that you look up to, or that have given you guidance, or that you've just been inspired by?
Well, I think that obviously my grandfather was an incredible figure in my life. I dedicated the book to him, and it's one of those things that while life is happening, you're not thinking about the importance of a certain person in your life. And I had to have a lot of time alone and thinking at the very beginning of the pandemic to kind of fully, and he's been gone from this earth for right now for about 17 years. So
And just for the benefit of the readers that haven't read your book yet, he was the guy that was kidnapped.
Yes, he was kidnapped
and then finally released.
Yeah. And so, but he was a very resourceful and creative man before that was a thing, if you know what I mean. It's like, you wouldn't read these things, but also he comes from the time where people were prepared not just to be great at their professions, but they were prepared to be really well equipped with a lot of knowledge from music and art and philosophy. And so this guy really had a lot of curiosity for life and for the things that he could do, even in the most dire circumstances, like when he lost all his money after having to pay for ransom and had to reinvent his life and career. So my grandfather has been obviously an incredible inspiration because he taught with actions what it means to be incredibly resourceful and creative. My husband is a great also source of advice and someone that I obviously respect. He has a very different mindset. His diversity of thought is really how my life with him works, because we are very, very different in how we think. And I've crossed paths with an incredible amount of brilliant people who have left an indelible mark in my life. And I think that it's a very important thing to navigate this life thinking that you're a student and not a master, because that is how I feel I have been able to synthesize and take from the amazing clients and mentors informally and friends that I have crossed paths with.
So bring us up to date now. You're an artist, you're an art curator, you're a writer, blogger, you've written your book. What's next for you? What's the next chapter?
Well, I think that I feel very accomplished in what I have done in my second act, which is this one. And I'm just furthering what I have done. I want to keep working with my private clients, building their art collections and helping them navigate this insane contemporary art world that keeps growing at the speed of lightning. And I love curating exhibitions. So I have an upcoming retrospective that I was hired to curate in the Dominican Republic for 40th year career of an artist, which actually I'm super flattered they chose me. And I enjoy very much consulting for companies that call me and say, we want to hear your take on creativity and perspectives. And it's I love getting to know people in the corporate world and sharing my knowledge and everything that I have gathered in the past 13 years, both from the world of entrepreneurship and the world of artists, and bring in to them. So as you can see, I have a lot of different fields within my field that I keep exploring. I just got my first TEDx talk out, and it was released about 2 weeks ago, and I had a lot of fun doing that. And I know that it's everybody has done a TEDx talk, but I never did one, so that was super cool for me to do that. So I'm always looking to explore and get into things that I know I can execute well and that will continue the creativity wheel moving forward. And because there's nothing worse for me, and I guess for anybody, than having that sensation of stagnation and being stuck. And that's exactly what I never want to be doing, is feeling that I'm not moving forward and taking risks and challenges with my life and career.
Well, we started with some controversy. Let's end with some controversy. My viewers wouldn't forgive me if I didn't ask you about NFTs, really. Not the blockchain aspect of the non-fungible token, which I think most people understand, but this kind of Wild West world that we're living in now, where it's unregulated. People can set up 10 of their own wallets, move money from one wallet to the other, and then when the price is high, some unsuspecting punter pays the higher price. What is the future for NFTs, Maria? Where are we headed?
It is very much like how you described it. It's how it is, right? It's the Wild West. I think regulation is coming very soon. There is an executive order signed by Biden that actually puts regulations in place. You know, unfortunately, laws are not very fast. Executive orders are, but then laws take time. And what I see important about NFTs is the following. We have a whole world of a new generation, right? A Gen Z. I have 2 children that fall in that generation, and everything that they do for the most part is in a digital world. So the NFTs are for that, are for people who enjoy having a parallel life in a metaverse. There are people who enjoy collecting things that may not be tangible, but they may live somewhere and you have bragging rights and say, this is mine. And, you know, and also the success of some, you know, the NFTs artists depends a lot on the community that they've built, and whether or not people who are investing in that artist believe that artist is going to be around for a long time, or is going to build something of meaning and that is going to worth something in the future, right? Pretty much similar to what it is when you invest in an emerging artist.
It is. Even the Mona Lisa. Is the Mona Lisa worth $200 million, or is it just worth $200 worth of wood and canvas and a little bit of paint?
It is that, right? It has to do with the history, but I think that like everything, it'll take time to settle a little bit because it's still very new. I think that the applications of the NFT technology per se are very important, because what that gives people is a certificate of authenticity, traceability, transparency. And so if those things could be actually put in place by whomever sells, you know, like the art, like the auction house or the galleries, etc., and back up tangible physical art with NFTs for the greater transparency and also authenticity issues that so many people have seen occur at times, that would be an incredible application of the technology that I think it'll be embraced in the near future. And you know, I think, like I said before, if people do not know what this is, then they just like, or I don't want to know, they should really just at least know what is an NFT and how it works and why it exists, and that's it. I mean, like, they don't really need to go buy and follow people and anything, but I think that they are here, that type of structure and technology is here to stay, and it will have a lot of different ramifications. And by the same token, people still like to have things in their houses and in their offices, and they want to have it on their walls. So physical art is not going to go anywhere.
No, and there was controversy about photographs when people started collecting photographs or limited edition prints. So this is just the new generation. I'm sure NFTs will be a force for good. There will be some people that have been burnt along the way, and there'll be others that make millions. So it's all part of the creative mix. So Maria Brito, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I hope to get to meet you one day when perhaps I'm over in America. But thank you very much for the time you spent today. I've really enjoyed our chat. and the best of luck to you with your book.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you.